With the NBA playoffs right around the corner, how badly do the Denver Nuggets need the pursuit of the number 2 seed in the West? With the news that Nico Medved will be shipping out of Fort Collins, what's the succession plan there? And how up in the air is the future for the Colorado State Rams basketball program? Yes, we'll have another special guest to help us continue our Mile High Milestones countdown in celebration of 30 years of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin in the NBA, where the Denver Nuggets, coming off of a stretch of games where they had 4 playoff caliber opponents, split those games 2-2, most recently with a 116-111 victory over the Houston Rockets, who coincidentally are neck and neck with them in the standings and maybe where they are trying to finish the regular season. Nikola Jokic once again did not play as he continues rehabbing from his ankle and elbow ailments that have kept him out and have raised some pretty significant concerns, in my opinion, about the big man's viability as we head into a critical postseason juncture that could significantly impact the future and the trajectory of the organization. Jamal Murray paced play for the Nuggets. He poured in 39 points, just short of a 40-burger, with 7 assists and 4 made three-point shots. It's kind of becoming the trend of the games where we see Jokic out. Somebody's got to fill that void. In theory, you want it to be Jamal Murray the way that it was last night in Houston. We saw Aaron Gordon pick it up a few games ago, having a career high as a Nugget in Jokic's absence. The bottom line is, and there are things you can take away from Murray's play, from the play of Aaron Gordon, who continues to kind of manage his calf strain and his ailments. And we try to look for consistency with Michael Porter Jr. and Christian Brown as they round out that starting lineup and hope to give some bolstering to their playoff rotation. But ultimately, the biggest storyline here is Jokic going to be healthy? And if he is, can he stay that way to the degree that is going to be needed for this Nuggets team that's been on an up and down roller coaster for the majority of the back half of this season? Can he be healthy enough to take them where they ultimately want and need to go? Well, the good news we got from Michael Malone is that while he may not play tonight at home against the Bulls, the Joker is coming back likely at some point during this homestand that they have coming up. I don't know exactly how things will look. That'll be something that we'll have to keep an eye on. But the bottom line is it's evident, no matter what metric you want to look at, how much better the Denver Nuggets are with Jokic on the court versus off. I think it's encouraging that we see performances like this from Jamal Murray, where he returns to a similar form, the likes of which that we saw during their title run in 2022. But the consistency, that's always been the main thing. So I look at these games with Jamal Murray and I think, okay, that's great. That's what I expect. And I think that's part of the frustration is why don't we see a more consistent version of the Jamal we saw against the Houston Rockets? Because keep in mind, where the Nuggets stand in the standings right now, this game against Houston was huge. This was a must-win, gotta-have-it game. The Nuggets are currently 1 game behind Houston for second place in the West, snapping a 9-game win streak for the Rockets. And it's actually not the first time the Nuggets have been able to do that. As slumpy as they've looked at times, they've been able to go in against playoff caliber, top of conference caliber teams and really shake things up. Houston's defense, by the way, is ranked 3rd. So being able to score 110 plus points against the 3rd ranked defense in the NBA, and with the pivotal standings battle that's going on, I find it encouraging, especially we consider they shot less than 70% at the charity stripe, which is not a hallmark for typically title contending teams. And they were able to balance that out with the other area where they've seemed to struggle for most of this season, behind the arc at the 3-point line, where they shot just under 50%. Yes, it was only 10 attempts, or 10 makes, I should say, 4 of which came from Jamal. But if you're going to struggle and you're going to falter in an area like that at the free throw line, you've got to be able to make it up in other areas. So all in all, I think from an energy and an effort standpoint, especially on the defensive side, yes, they gave up over 100 points. I get it. But you got to take things relative, right? The Nuggets are not a great defensive team. So when you look at the hustle, the energy, and the effort leading to a win, I think that's encouraging. And I think you echoed those comments, or you heard those comments echoed by Michael Malone after the game. The Nuggets, by the way, are 10-1 this season when Jamal Murray goes for 30 plus. In theory, you want that to happen maybe sometimes when Jokic is on the court versus when he is not, and somebody's got to fill the black hole or the void offensively, and it just happened to be Murray's night to do so. But all in all, I think it's an encouraging step heading into this home stretch, kicking off tonight against the Bulls. On the other end of the hardwood, in the college game, we saw a heartbreaker last night for the CSU Rams. They were going up against the Maryland Terrapins for a shot at a Sweet 16 bid, the likes of which they hadn't had in decades. And back when they did last achieve it, they only had to win one game to get there because it was pre-expansion of the March Madness bracket. So that tells you how long it's been since CSU's had something within their grasp to be able to accomplish. And it looked like it was there. They Jalen Lake hits a 3-point shot with 6 seconds left in the game to put the Rams up one, and they end up calling a timeout. Maryland does on the other end with 3.6 seconds left. So you got one more play, one more opportunity. And for the first time this season, the Maryland Terrapins were on the right side of a buzzer beater, as we saw 3 or 4 times throughout the course of this season, them being on the losing end of it with their 3 or 4 losses heading into tournament play. So kind of a tough one, because this is kind of what we like about March Madness, right? We like the chaos, we like the intensity, and it just kind of sucks when your team's on the losing end of it. Well, that's where CSU finds themselves today. There was a little bit of controversy, though, that I'd like to get your input on. Feel free to chime in, as you always do, in the comments below. Was it a travel at the end of the game by Maryland studs freshman Derek Queen? It kind of depends on who you ask and where you want to blur the line with officiating, because there's the gather step crew who defend it staunchly and the gather step crew who hate it aggressively. And there's also a difference in officiating between the NCAA and the NBA as it relates to these things. So when I watched it live, I will just say my first thought was not to scream travel. I thought that he hit a very high degree difficulty shot. I think that if you wanted to maybe take exception to the way that CSU defended the well-drawn-up play by Maryland to allow him to get that close to the basket to take an albeit toughly contested shot, maybe. But I just think you found a situation where, as Nico Medved alluded to, they made one more play than we did. And as it relates to the travel, Nico Medved wasn't really denying it, but he wasn't really accepting it either. He essentially said that he hadn't seen the video yet. Quote, "It's going to be hard for me to watch. I don't know. Maybe it was a travel. Maybe it wasn't. It doesn't matter. They didn't call one." And that ultimately is where the conversation ends as it relates to that. Whether it was, whether it wasn't, whether it was robbery, whether it was oversight, it wasn't called. And the Rams are going home, like so many teams thus far have gone to make it to this Sweet 16. On the degree of difficulty of the shot, Medved wasn't really fazed by that either. He was pleased with his defense. In fact, he said essentially, "I thought we played it pretty well. It's about all we could ask for," and he made a freaking unbelievable shot. And that's what it was. Doesn't make it sting any less, but it is the truth. And what does sting, I think, was hearing the comments from Jalen Lake after the game, who played his last collegiate game as a member of the Colorado Rams. And he was emotional when asked about reflecting on his time and what it meant. He said, "I can't even put it into words. This has been the best 4 years of my life. I wish I could wear Colorado State for the rest of my life. It means that much to me." And I just got to say, listen, as I have, and I'm sure many of you have out there who have gone through their collegiate experience without being an athlete or anything like that, there's something so romantic and special about collegiate sports. And I think you see it here in Colorado. I think you see it outside of the state at bigger programs in the Power Five and the like that get all the attention. But when I saw that post-game press conference and I listened to those words from Jalen Lake, who, by the way, did everything he possibly could to put his team into the Sweet 16, hitting that shot off a great feed from Nick Clifford, by the way, who I think that play initially, that go-ahead play, was designed to put the ball into Nick Clifford's hands and let your star do the best that he can and make a play. But I thought it was exceptional awareness from Nick Clifford to realize that he was getting trapped, dish it out there to his teammate, and allow him to make a play that he wasn't going to be able to. And Jalen Lake converted on that. So to get inside the head of Jalen Lake in that moment, who hit a go-ahead three in the final seconds. Should have been probably the de facto game winner if you just hold down for one more defensive stand. And then to not have it happen and be sitting there at the podium asked about reflecting on your time in the rawness of that moment. I just thought it was a really special, cool moment with a local tie here. And I just wanted to make sure that I gave my hat tip to Jalen Lake, to Nick Clifford, and to Nico Medved for putting together a run that I don't think any of us expected, 3, 4, 5 weeks ago, if we look back on the college basketball season. As if the heartbreak of being on the wrong end of a buzzer beater wasn't enough, though, you have to deal with the news that head coach Nico Medved will now be on the move. The tears were barely dry on the cheeks of the Colorado State Rams before the announcement this morning was made that Medved will be taking over the vacant position at the University of Minnesota, a community in a town where he shares a hometown affinity for, a university that he is an alumni of. So all the signs were pointing behind the scenes for Nico Medved to make this move. But man, it really does, just as it does anytime you have a coaching shakeup or an organizational change to that degree, it really does bring up questions about the future of the program and where they can go based on the positive momentum that they'd have thus far. So I'll be names that come up. There's no real stopping period for all of this because you have the transfer portal opening up now for collegiate sports in between the round of 32 and the Sweet 16. So these things are going to be happening right away. And my guess is just as quickly as Colorado State found out about their departure with Nico, we will be finding about the incoming candidate very soon. All right. It is time to continue our countdown of the Mile High Milestones feature presented by your local Ford dealers. We are officially halfway through the countdown. We started at number 30, recapping the magical season of Ubaldo Jimenez for the Colorado Rockies in 2010, and have winded our way through the likes of the comeback kids in Colorado and the magical 3-1 comebacks in the bubble, Todd Helton's Hall of Fame induction. We've had multiple Stanley Cup winning appearances. John Elway becoming general manager of the Denver Broncos, the Hurricane Josh McDaniels experience. And here at number 15, we land on, maybe to some of you out there, the most painful milestone encapsulation on this list. And that is the Denver Broncos quarterback carousel. And to help us take this walk down memory lane, we bring in one of our own, great friend of the show, great contributor to our Denver Sports 104.3 The Brand. That is Andrew Mason, our senior Broncos writer. Mace, you have covered the Denver Broncos for longer than some of our viewers maybe have been alive. And you have been as tightly connected to this team as just about anyone in the market. And so when you look back on the quarterback carousel storyline, which of course stretches from the year 2016, when Payton Manning hangs it up and rides off into the sunset after Super Bowl 50, to literally today, as we sit here heading into the 2025 season, were there signs early on, you think, when you look back in your own mind, did you see signs that potentially, starting with the heir apparent Trevor Siemian, that the Broncos could be headed for the tumble that they were eventually going to take?
That's a good question. I think it's one of those things, it's almost like the frog in boiling water that you don't necessarily realize it until it's too late, until the water has gotten so hot and you can't escape it. Because that first season, Trevor Siemian does just enough to kind of keep them in the mix. You still have the no-fly zone. You still have a great defense. And you can kind of make yourself think, okay, maybe he can be just enough. Mm-hmm. Maybe they draft Paxton Lynch. Maybe Paxton can, maybe he just needs a lot of time. Maybe you give him a year or two and he can develop and he can become something. You start playing the maybe game. That's the thing. And you start playing the, if you give him time game sort of thing. You start playing the hope game. The other thing is also when you've just come off of a run where you went to the Super Bowl, you tend to be a little bit more optimistic that things are going to work out. Like you're in a more positive mind frame. So when Trevor Siemian has a not bad season in 2016, and then he plays really well those first 2 games of 2017, Richie, there were people after 2 weeks in 2017 that were suggesting that Trevor Siemian should get a long-term contract extension.
Yep.
People on the station. I mean, you can probably go back and find the tapes and find the promos.
Mark
I'm
Schlereth.
sure that there were promos saying, should Trevor Siemian get a long-term contract? And there were, sound bites from the station, listen to 104.3 The Fan. I'm sure those are out there. I'm sure those are in the archives. So that's, I think it was just sort of a different mindset. So the negativity had not kind of enveloped Broncos country at that point in time. So the water was starting to boil, but nobody was aware of it then. And then maybe 3-4 years later, it starts adding up, it starts accumulating. And then you realize what kind of mess that you're in.
Yeah, you're right, Mace. I mean, we had people on this station calling Trevor Siemian the Sim-Messiah. He was going to be the one that was going to pick up he was going to be the one to pick up the torch and carry the next chapter of Broncos football. And then when it wasn't him, you drafted Paxton Lynch. You brought in a high-profile free agent like Case Keenum, who, if Kirk Cousins hadn't happened to also line up, would have been the belle of the ball in free agency. You tried to revive things with Joe Flacco, who apparently has played well. Basically, every other stint in his career outside of Baltimore has played well, except Denver. You draft Drew Lock, but it's a second-round pick, and there's some wishy-washiness there. Just because it's the most damning thing that sticks out in my mind when I think back about this is the graphic, the Carnival of Horrors graphic that would come up on almost every televised Broncos game with the carousel of horrors of quarterbacks. So just for my own cathartic experience, I want to make sure that we revisit for our viewers just how many quarterbacks started for the Broncos since that 2016 season. The aforementioned Siemian and Lynch, Brock Osweiler coming back after being part of the heroic Super Bowl 50 efforts, Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, Jeff Driscoll, Rippon, the Phillip Lindsay / Kentel Hinton game, which may be one of the most embarrassing games in franchise history. Drew versus Teddy. They have the same birthday. Russell Wilson and Jarrett Stidham. And we finish with Bo Nix. So, Mace, looking at that just absolute brutal murderer's row of quarterbacks, what in your mind signified the low point for starting quarterback for the Broncos during this carousel ride?
The low point's probably the Kendall Hinton game. That's probably still that's a franchise low point, especially given what we learned later, especially the reporting from Lindsey Jones, what we learned about that, what went into it, how, you can say what you want about whatever everyone feels about the rules and everything that was going on that time. But the thing that still gets me is that, and a reason why the NFL did what it did and forced the Broncos to play that game was because the quarterbacks tried to mislead the investigation that was going on. Like
Tracergate. Yep.
Yes. And that's incredibly stupid because there are cameras everywhere in that facility. You weren't going to get away with subterfuge.
Yes.
If they just come clean and said, we did the thing with the contact tracers. If they'd come clean, I believe the NFL would have given them grace and let them play the game a day or two later, at which point they would have cleared the protocol and the Broncos would have had a quarterback. It would have been spared the embarrassment. But if you try to mislead the investigators, they basically were going to make an example of the Broncos at that point.
Yep,
So,
we're in complete agreement on
yeah.
that. I think that moment encapsulated so many things. One, with the Tracergate kind of drama that you had mentioned, it just pointed to a complete and utter lack of leadership within the quarterback room, which then extrapolates further to like the identity as kind of like a rudderless franchise that seemed to just be listing in the wind. And then you extrapolate that further to the commentary that was made about potentially the league sending a message to the Denver Broncos ownership trust at that point, which was embroiled in this Game of Thronesian level battle over which Bolin child or outside hire may be the best, potential suitor to take over the franchise at that point. It just really, from ownership to management to coaching to player, the fact that we were potentially trying to explore rules about could a quarterback's coach suit up at quarterback if he was signed away and change his contract. And that to me is the de facto low point. Mace, couple quick ones for you on the way out. The quarterback carousel, in theory, is still spinning. Although after one season with Bo Nix, it feels like the ride may be coming to an end. Do you think that Bo Nix will end the Broncos' spinning of the quarterback carousel? And if so, what is it about him or what does he have that his previous 13 predecessors do not?
Well, he has the franchise investment in him to start with. The fact that he got off to such a good start as a rookie. Now you have that season and you can keep building on it. There's that tangible progress that he made as a rookie, the expectation that he can continue taking the steps beyond that in year 2, and you hope year 3, year 4. So right there, you have now enough to where you can turn the page for a second year and a third year and a fourth year. I would expect that we have a minimum 4-year run with Bo Nix as the quarterback. So that right there stops the carousel for at least that length of time. The question then becomes, can he stop it for beyond that length? That's what we don't yet had the answer to that. And that is what is up in the air. The next few years are about determining whether the Bo Nix era is something long-term or something medium-term. That's also going to determine the length of the Sean Payton era as well. The Sean Payton era as a coach is tied to Bo Nix. Sean Payton's legacy is tied to Bo Nix. If Bo succeeds, Sean Payton may end up being in Denver 8-10 years as a head coach. If Bo Nix succeeds, Sean Payton may be a Hall of Famer, because that you may be talking about the Broncos being a Super Bowl team at some point.
Mm-hmm.
The Bronco, if Bo Nix does not succeed, then Sean Payton probably doesn't get back to a Super Bowl. The Broncos probably don't take the next steps beyond 10-7, and Sean Payton probably doesn't get to the Hall of Fame here. And then the Broncos are looking for a new coach in a few years. So there's so much that's tied to Bo Nix. But at minimum, I believe Bo Nix has a 4-year run as quarterback, and so for that length of time, yes, the quarterback carousel has stopped.
Well, I think a lot of eyes will be on this 2025 season and how the sophomore season compares to the freshman breakout that we saw just this past season. Mace, guilty pleasure for you question on the way out.
Yep.
You, as I mentioned before, cover the Broncos as closely as anybody, but you're a big baseball guy. And I know that you pay a lot of attention to what's going on over at 20th and Blake or over at Salt River Fields at Talking Stick, with the Cactus League action. So there's been some rumble and some news with the Rockies over the last couple of weeks or so that, stop me if you've heard this before, has people scratching their heads. And I think it kind of started with the trading away of Nolan Jones to bring in Tyler Freeman, a utility player, bring him back, I should say, and the connection that those two had. And I think a lot of people were scratching your heads because this was a guy who was a legitimate Rookie of the Year candidate in 23, was still presenting as like a 20 home run, decent bat guy even last season, despite playing less games. And you trade him away as a potential bright young piece for a player that you don't know is going to be able to bring that same value, and you're managing roster decisions at that point. So then I think there's a silver lining that says, hey, with the vacancy of Nolan Jones, that's got to solidify a roster spot on opening day for Zach Veen, right? Well, then it comes out the news that Zach Veen will not be on the opening day roster. He will begin his Major League Baseball career in AAA, spending some time with the Isotopes, and nobody really seems to know why, because players that are named over him are Nick Martini and then even Sam Hilliard as kind of a reserve outfielder option. And you look at Nick Martini and you're like, that's like a Spider-Man mean guy with Jake Cave, right? Like, what's the difference between like a grizzled, aging kind of veteran guy, and then you have Sam Hilliard, who you know of. And I saw Bud Black made a comment about, well, there's concern about his strikeout rate being up toward 33%, but that's the same as Sam Hilliard and several other players who also made the roster and also play that position. So why, Mace, is the Cactus League MVP with all the promise and a roster spot vacated by Nolan Jones not going to be on this roster opening day?
Well, I'll say this about winning the Rockies Cactus League MVP, the Abby Greer Award. That hasn't necessarily resulted in being on the big club's roster coming out of spring training. That's about a 50-50 proposition over the years. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're on the Rockies roster to start a season. I'll start there. But the only rational explanation for this, there are two. A, if Bud Black believes that Zach Veen would only be platooning at the start of the season, whereas in Albuquerque, he'd be playing every day, that's a fair sentiment, okay? That you can defend that. The other thing, and it would actually make a lot of sense, even though it would also sort of reflect, you could make a judgment on the Rockies organization if this is the case. It's the service time game, because it's a service time manipulation thing. If a player is on the roster for 16 days fewer than the length of the Major League regular season, 187 days, if they're on the roster for 16 days fewer than that, then they're not credited with the full year of Major League service time towards free agency, towards hitting arbitration years. So you often see teams, if they've got a player that they know they want to bring up, you'll often see them wait to bring that player up for 16 days or 20 days or 30 days and then call them up so they can basically get another year before that player would eventually hit free agency, sort of, kind of play that game a little bit. So that would be something that if they're kind of playing the long-term game for Zach Veen, that they might be thinking of. I mean, you mentioned the strikeout rate. When I saw that quote from Bud Black yesterday and he said strikeout rate, I'm like, have you seen Sam Hilliard's strikeout rate over the last few years? Actually, Sam Hilliard's strikeout rate in the Cactus League heading into Sunday was 50%.
Yeah, I was going to say it was 50%.
Highest of anybody with at least 35 plate appearances in all of spring training, Cactus League or Grapefruit League. And Sam Hilliard made the team, and his strikeout rate's always been among the highest for like all but one of his seasons in Major League Baseball. So, it didn't really pass the smell test. I think we'll see Zach Veen sooner rather than later, but hearing that, yeah, there's something's going on. But I do think we'll see Zach Veen. And if you're looking at other young outfielders, they have, Jordan Beck's going to get some playing time, and we saw him last year. He had a couple of good stretches, went into a funk at the end of last season, so they're going to give him a little bit more of a look. Sean Bouchard, who had a biceps injury in spring training 2 years ago, and that waylaid his development. I think they're going to give him a long look here earlier this season, and he had a very good Cactus League performance the last month or so. So he's going to get a look as well. So it's not like it's not like you're not going to see young players here with Nolan Jones out of the mix and Zach Veen down in Albuquerque. But I think everyone wants to see Veen as the former first-round pick who we've been waiting on for the last couple of years now. I mean, because they picked him in the first round all the way back in 2020. I think we're all ready to see him at the big club.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think that the one silver lining that it seems we have here with the Rockies locally is that they're going to probably break our hearts or disappoint us in the final standings and things like that. But the one thing we get to hold on to is that they do seem to cultivate or bring in some young talent that gets to flash for a couple of years before they become a Boston Red Sox or a New York Yankee or whatever. And so it just, I think I'm ready to start my clock on Zach Veen of the 2 or 3, maybe 4 years that I'll get to enjoy him before he's competing for World Series with someone else.
I know. I mean, the thing is, this team actually has some intriguing young players. Michael Tolley at first really came on second half of last season. Hunter Goodman behind the plate. They moved him to catcher last year, and like he's got a heck of a bat right now. I know the couple of years, last 2 years, 100+ losses. If they commit to the young players, I think they can be an entertaining team to watch at the plate. The rotation's still shaky. Chase Dollander's still a little ways off, although his last 2 of his recent starts in spring were very encouraging. He was their first-round pick a couple of years ago. I think they'll have some entertainment value at 20th and Blake this summer, even though they'll probably still be a last-place team.
All right. Well, I guess we won't have to wait that much longer before the road to 100 potentially continues once again. Mace, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm sure there'll be some more milestones here that we can catch up with you with before things really get going with the Broncos in their offseason program. So thank you again.
My pleasure, Richie.
Awesome. To the rest of you out there, have a great rest of your day. Always appreciate your comments, feedback, concerns, questions, and I love hanging out with you each and every weekday right here at noon on Denver Sports 104 through the Fan. So I will catch you all at the same time in the same place tomorrow.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.